party started. So President Obama went to Cuba today, actually yesterday, and he was greeted by President, well, not on the tarmac, but today he was actually greeted by President Raul Castro, and they had a press conference and they discussed all the historic significance of it, right? So before I tell you everything that's wrong with it, it is historically significant. It is a mending of the ties that were broken for almost 50 years. It doesn't lift the embargo that has been placed on Cuba for those 50 odd years. But it does open up some diplomatic relationships at the highest level. Obviously, President Obama is there. It also, actually, let me just skip with all the formalities on this story, because the thing that stood out the most to me about this entire trip is that along with this trip went dozens of CEOs and basically America's corporate class, capitalist class. And it just begged the question to me, as historically important and significant as it is, right? As great as it is to have ties with Cuba, it just, the most glaring question that jumps out to me is, did it really take capitalistic opportunities to trump 50 years of bad blood between America and Cuba? And of course, the answer is, yeah. You know, there are economic ties that want to be deepened and widened so that America can get access to the I don't want to say the middle class in Cuba, but to the population of Cuba. American businesses want to go to Cuba. And we wrap it in, you know, it is a great historical thing, right? It's cool, right? We've been at odds, at a Cold War with Cuba for generations, since John F. Kennedy. So it is great that President Obama is the president that could bring those tensions to an end. Great. But it took the business class, it took corporate America to be the impetus behind it, in my opinion, because when you look at the roster of people who went with them, you really realize that this is not about having democratic ties with Cuba. This is about having capitalistic ties with Cuba. Almost like our relationship with China, right? Our relationship with China, you have an authoritarian regime. America is okay with you having an authoritarian regime. That's fine. Are you open to our markets? Are you open to our businesses? Are you open to our corporations? If you're open to our corporations, then America can turn a blind eye to the human rights violations. America can turn an eye to all, everything that we tell our people we should be afraid of. We could turn our eye to the communistic authoritarianism in China, so long as our markets are open to China. Well, and so long as we have access to that middle class, to those billions of Chinese people who are, to the billion Chinese people rather, who are growing a middle class and can spend money on our cheap goods. And I have a feeling, I just have this suspicion, and it will pan out over time, whether I'm right or if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that this entire charade, or let me be fair, this entire affair in Cuba is far more about the money and the access of our businesses being able to do business in Cuba versus anything else that they're painting this out to be. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, but it's a very telling thing to me. It's a very telling thing because, there's a theory called the democratic peace theory in political science. And we have this notion that America will never really go to war with anyone who's a democracy. And so we try to label or categorize the nations that we have gone to war with as not being democratic. But the truth of the matter is, it's not so much a democratic thing, small d. It's about capitalism. Anywhere you find a McDonald's, there is a good chance that we have never gone to war with them and that we won't go to war with them. It's really the McDonaldization theory more so than the democratic theory. And that's what I think is unfolding in Cuba. Now, kudos to President Obama. He's got a historic thing underneath his belt, but the underlying principle behind it, when you look at the business class that went with President Obama, you realize that it's not so much about democracy, because they are not a democracy. You know, even in the presser today, hell, his name just escaped me. That Castro, how can I forget Castro? Raul Castro asserted that they don't have any type of human rights violations, right? Which is clearly not the case. There are political prisoners. There are problems from any authoritarian regime, whether you agree with them economically, whether you disagree with them economically, any type of a regime that forces its way into power and maintains that power by force, there are going to be human rights violations. There will be political prisoners. This isn't rocket science, it's just common sense. And so America is yet again going to be willing to turn a blind eye to those human rights violations in exchange for the expediency and the business opportunity that Cuba presents. So, I mean, I guess I could have just, you know, thought positively and talked and spoke positively about President Obama's, you know, trip to Cuba. But hang on, I'm going to look something up. I could have just spoken positively about it, but that's the first thing that jumped out. That's the first thing that jumps out to me. Matter of fact, Bloomberg has a piece about all of the economic opportunities that are present for American businesses in Cuba. And that amount is increasing, obviously, over time. I'm trying to find a definitive list of, and I'm sure somebody can help me out with that. There was a list of companies that went with President Obama, and it just shows you the emphasis, the laser-like attention on business. That's what it's all about. All right. In other news.